Good morning. This lesson today is going to be over the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And this is the short story that I was talking about in class where the character, the main character, is having postpartum depression. And it was written in 1892. And this is linking to the story of an hour that we talked about last week. I want you students to get used to looking at two texts and doing an inter-textual comparison. And this is going to set you up for the next essay that we write, which is our research essay. So, I hope you've read this story. It can be kind of confusing, and the commentary that I mostly get from students is that they get confused in the middle of it. The language is very back and forth, and that is intentional. And the reason it's intentional is because she's having a mental breakdown. And we have what we start with is an unreliable narrator. So she's an unreliable narrator, and she is coming from her perspective only, and it is skewed through her mental illness. So when we start off, she starts by saying, "It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer." Now, so right off the bat, she says they're mere and ordinary, but they're going to secure an ancestral hall, and she goes on to describe it a little bit, and she says it's haunted. It's a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate. It's haunted, and even very romantic, and she said, but that would be asking, she goes, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. So we have fate brought into a romantic kind of haunting or haunted place. And what we start to understand is this is kind of where her mind is going already, this haunting. And in Gothic texts in particular, a haunting indicates something from the past coming back again and again. Now, right now, this is her presence. She has, in real life, the author suffered postpartum depression and was institutionalized, and she nearly died in that process. She was just emotionally crippled by the end of it all, and so this writing was her response to that. I don't know if you can read this. It says, "I put the lit in literature." I just love it so much. I have to drink coffee out of it every day. Okay. Or tea. Either one, because they're both good. So, she says, "Still, I will proudly declare there's something queer about it." So we get the idea that there's something wrong with the house. I want you to start thinking of the house symbolically as a house is symbolic of a person, a family, a situation, any kind of foundational type of entity in your life. Now, these are my words. Some people may see a house as a symbol of something else. So all I ask of you is that you support that with your analysis or through the text. But we can't just say anything. It has to be supported. So for me, because the house is the thing that is like a focus in the beginning. The house represents the family, and the house represents the self, and we want to see what kind of, like, how the house is described, but then also how she reacts and responds to the house, and how she kind of goes down her mental decline in the house. So that is why I say that, because we're gonna see some evidence of that. So she starts by saying, why should it be let so cheaply? And why should it have stood so long untenanted? So no one's in there. It's cheap, and no one is in there. And so John laughs, and then she says something odd. She says, "But one expects that in marriage." And so when we walk into marriage expecting that we're going to be laughed at, this is making a political statement and a personal statement as well, if you will, for the character. So politically, at this time period, women had very few rights, if any, and especially in Louisiana, and where we were talking about Kate Chopin and the story of an hour, we are going to talk about how those laws shape marriage. Okay, so for Louisiana, it's different than Charlotte Perkins Gilman, but she is commenting on the fact that women in the marriage are not valued. So she says she gives some characterization about John. He's practical in the extreme, and he has no patience with faith and intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. And so through this, we start to see how John is in an opposite to her, because she's already thought that the house being romantically haunted would be just too much to ask for. So she is demonstrating their differences at this point. So then she says he's a physician, and perhaps, and she goes, and I wouldn't say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. So I'm going to go over that, but she said, but basically essentially she said, John is a physician, and perhaps, that is one reason I do not get well faster. So she then starts to blame doctors and her husband for the fact she's not getting well. Now, the little parentheses, the little a positive there where it says, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind, is her journal. She's writing in her journal, and she is going through it, and she's been told not to write. Now, this literally happened with Gilman, and this was actually one of the kind of therapies for women who were having physical problems or emotional problems. They would put them in a room and tell them, no thinking, no writing, don't journal, don't create anything. All you really need to do is take care of your husband and your children, and that's it. Do, as little as possible. And don't think about things. Just do nothing. Don't think. So Gilman, and I'm going back to the author here, was a very creative person. She's a very independent person. And so that was like death to her. And because this is a writing over her experience, I do link back to the author in this particular case. I don't always do that with short stories because, we've already talked about how short stories don't necessarily represent the views of the author. They might represent a critique by the author of some kind of ideological factor or some sort of situation in society that he or she may want to critique. So she goes on to say he doesn't believe she's sick, and then she makes this statement, and what can one do? So that statement to me is like today's, it is what it is. And that feels hopeless. To say that something, it just is, it is what it is, it makes it feel like there is nothing else one can do to improve the situation. So that to me feels like despair and hopelessness. And she goes on to talk about the physician, if a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? So, in addition to the fact that he is a physician, he's her husband, he has this kind of power and control over the situation. That makes her feel even more helpless because she's the one with the hysterical tendency. And who are people going to listen to? Are they going to listen to a mom who just had a baby who is having emotional issues? Or are they going to listen to a father and a husband and a physician? And this is what the story critiques. On top of that, she says her brother is a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So this is just building up this wall. Here's the family, if you will. The brothers and the husband make up walls around her, and they are essentially shielding her or holding her in, and we'll see that on the second page of this story. There's when she describes the house, there are gates and it's she said gates and hedges and hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate rooms. And so for me, in my mind, the brother and the husband end up being like walls and gates and hedges around her. So those things can lock people out and they can keep people in. It can be something of a protection, or it can feel like a trap. So when I read that, it feels more of an enclosure in a negative sense. So you can read it for yourself. I know I'm explicating it, but you can read it for yourself and see what kind of response you get, because everybody's life experiences may feel differently. It may make you feel different about the story. So she goes on to talk about the meds she takes, and she's very careless about it. She doesn't even know what they're all called, phosphates or phosphites, and whatever it is, tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and she's absolutely forbidden to quote unquote work until I'm well again. And then she makes this statement that I find really interesting. She goes, personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. So she has her own ideas, and she's saying, personally, I feel this way. I think this. And she puts it down in her book where it's dead paper. This dead paper. There's that adage that says dead men tell no tales, and or dead men tell no lies, and that sort of thing. So here, it's as if her words that are journaled, which are private and personal, are being put into a dead space. And in that dead space, within that space, there's nothing happening. There's no growth. There's no life. There's nothing coming from that. And it's as if they go into a void and nobody hears her and nobody's listening to her. So, and I think at this point, she's probably grateful for the private space. And I think the journal aspect of this is really interesting, because journals are intentionally private, or they're supposed to be. And it feels like I don't know the word I'm looking for. It feels like you've had a definite personal line crossed. If somebody reads your journal, it's an invasion, right? So moving on, I want to set this story up really well. That's why I'm going a little slower and more detailed over it. However, the next thing she says is, after saying what she personally thinks, she goes, but what is one to do? What is one to do? More helplessness. So the story, now I'm going to go a little faster, because I wanted to set her up as a character. She feels helpless. She's in this house with her husband, the physician, and her brother that agrees. And remember what I told you about how back in the day, husbands and brothers and fathers and uncles and men had a great deal of control over the women in their life, whether that was sisters or wives or children, etc. So some females weren't even allowed to walk down the street without a male presence. And so you can imagine when they get ill, somebody else is going to be telling them what to do. So she goes out. She said again that she fancies that her condition, that in her condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, she goes, I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus. But John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about my condition, and I confess it always makes me feel bad. So she keeps saying what she thinks would be good for her is to get out and have friends and do things. But then John, on the other hand, is going to do the opposite of what she wants. And then, it does make her feel bad to think about it. So now she has shame and guilt on top of her own feelings. So as the story keeps going, she starts to describe the house. And like I was saying, that there's hedges and walls and gates and a lock and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. So this place has an estate. I do want to comment on one thing that I wanted to bring up as far as her being an unreliable narrator. She says that in the beginning that they're mere ordinary people, and yet her husband and her brother are both physicians and people of high standing. So now this can be going two ways. Now personally, I feel like the fact that they're renting this house and that they are physicians and people of standing, that perhaps her idea of them being mere ordinary people is inaccurate, and that actually they're well-to-do and she has every need that she has met. You could also say that maybe her brother and her husband aren't really, like, maybe they're acting as physicians. That's the fun with this story. You can kind of take it in a way that you want to, as long as you support yourself. Personally, I feel that when she says they're mere ordinary people and then they're renting this big house, that she is trying to put herself as more common than what she is. Now, I've had some students say that she feels like, I've had some students say that they feel like the mere ordinary people is more accurate and that they wouldn't actually rent that house, but physicians aren't able to rent a house. So then we always come down to the end of the story to say, is that their house? So this is one of those stories that we have a lot of questions about it because it is a psychological twister. So any of those things can be debated. I'm just throwing that out there. So don't let it confuse you at all. Just let it be something you're thinking about. And as far as her being an unreliable narrator. Okay, so she talks about how she gets angry and she continues to blame her nervous condition. And then she describes her room and how she wanted a certain room, but John said she couldn't have it. And then they go upstairs and there's only one window, and not a room for two beds, and no near room for him. He was looking for another one because she had wanted the one with the roses all over the window and pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings. Real pretty and feminine, but he wouldn't have it. So he is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. So in that sentence, I want you to start reading this story, and I'm not going to dictate or explicate every single page because what I want you to do is close read it. But I wanted to go through a couple of pages where I do this for you so you can see what to do. So he says, like she said, he is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. So one side of that says he's caring for me. The other side of it says, in my estimation, that he's micromanaging. Special direction feels like micromanagement, that she can't really go on without what he says to do. And then she has a schedule every day. Every hour is scheduled. So there it goes with the micromanagement. And he takes all care from me. He takes all care from me. And so I feel basically ungrateful not to value it more. So now on top of everything else of feeling bad about her condition, now she feels shameful and shamed and ungrateful for how she feels. Well, we can see where this is going. This is, some of it feels gaslighted, like she's being gaslighted and that she has the shame and depression, how depression works into not having any energy. She even mentions that. He even says, we came here solely on my account. So now she feels blamed for that. And so she can have perfect rest. And so then she goes and describes the room. It's a big, airy room, the whole floor nearly with windows that look all ways and air and sunshine galore. Sounds nice. Then it was a nursery first, and then a playroom and gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the wall. So remember, we have an unreliable narrator, and every little word could be something else. So as you read the story, if you haven't read the story all the way through or you're confused when we get to the end, we can talk more about this. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off the paper in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach. So I call this foreshadowing. If you haven't got to the end of it, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but this is some foreshadowing of the story. and a great place on the other side of the room, low down. I never saw a worse paper in my life. And so then she starts to describe the patterns, and she says they commit every artistic sin. Now remember, she's a creative person, and she's not being allowed to write. She's not being allowed to do anything. So she's creative, and she's talking about that. It's also talking about how ugly and terrible it is. It's dull enough to confuse the eye in the following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. So this wallpaper represents some of the things she might be feeling, or the things she may seem like she might be behaving in, outrageous angles or actions, and destroying themselves in unheard of contradictions. So she's already contradicted herself in sentences where she says he loves and cares for her, but then he manages every minute, right? She can't move without special direction. And now the color is repellent, almost revolting. Smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. Yellow, the symbol, we need to look at colors with symbolic intent every time you read a story. Yes, sometimes, as one of my students said, can't a yellow door just sometimes be a yellow door? Yes, it absolutely can. And sometimes a yellow door can signify a doorway to something else, and the yellow color is bright and cheerful and happy. And sometimes it's a foil for what it actually is, and that's the opposite of that. Maybe it's saying how terrible it could be. It's a juxtaposition of meaning. And I like to look at literature from that perspective because it's not only fun for me, but it makes me think differently. But using the text itself, we can see that yellow here is not a happy thing. It's not happy. They're describing it. Her actions are not happy. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. There comes John. I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. And that's the end of that first journal section. This is a journal entry. So here she goes on. She's talking about this nursery, how John is away all day. She goes, and some of his cases are serious. And she goes, I am glad my case is not serious. She's feeling a little more positive, right? But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. Here we go with her contradictions, outrageous and angles and contradictions. She says John doesn't really actually understand her and how much she's suffering. And she goes on to say about how nobody would be able to believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able to dress and entertain and order things. What an effort it is to do what little I am able. So she feels exhausted, and anyone who's had depression or experienced it or read about it understands the level of exhaustion that can come with depression, and just being unable to move, or even just feeling like you can get out of the bed. And sometimes depression looks the opposite, where you're utterly cheerful and it's a cover-up. So this is another thing that makes the reality of this story and why people respond to it so well, I think. Also, an intense compassion for her. She goes, it is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby. And yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. And so she says she cannot be with him in this emphasis. The word cannot is italicized to emphasize how it's not possible. And at first he meant to repaper the room. Oh, she said, I suppose John was never nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about the wallpaper. So now he's laughing at her again, and he's not taking her seriously. And he meant to change it, but afterwards he said he was letting it get the better of her, and that nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. So some of the things that John is doing, he's painted as a person who is like he's hearing these things, but he's going to make her do the opposite of actually what she wants because it's good for her, and he knows what's good for her. So he said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then the gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. He said, the place is doing you good, and really, dear, I don't come to renovate the house just for a 3 months rental. So he goes, I don't care to renovate the house just for a 3 months rental. And so they're there for 3 months and to renovate the house. No, he said he doesn't want to renovate the house. He goes, then do let us go downstairs. There's such pretty rooms. And he took her in his arms and called her a blessed little goose and said he would go down cellar if I wished and have it whitewashed into the bargain. But so the thing is this room has taken on, such a negative intent. And now we want to see how she keeps going on to where the pattern is described, and it becomes more and more vicious. It becomes more and more violent. It becomes more egregious to look at. And in fact, at some point, she's interacting with it. She said the paper, there's a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down, which is terrifying. That's a terrifying image. And she said the paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. So there she's using a literary device of personification to personify this wallpaper. And she goes, I never knew so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. She goes, I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. So she's saying she's always had that kind of thing. But she does use this next chapter to talk about the personification of inanimate objects. Now, I think we all understand, things that go bump in the night when you're dreaming or you're asleep and you wake up and things that have shadows and it makes you feel like something's there, or it looks like something that it isn't. But this is her descent into her madness. And so she did have 4th of July, and they had company, and she said of course she didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now, but it tired her out all the same. Says John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to Weir Mitchell in the fall. So if you look, if you're reading this in some other text, it says that's a Philadelphia neurologist psychologist who introduced the rest cure for nervous diseases. So the rest cure is what Gilman actually had, and she said she didn't want to go there at all. She had a friend that was in his hands once, and she says he is just like John and my brother, only more so. So there is a lot of reality being put into this story. So I just want you, I'm not gonna keep going page by page because this is already almost 30 minutes. What I want you to consider, I did that for the purpose of you seeing me, watching me, and demonstrating how to read each line. We're doing close reading on this text. And I want you to start looking at the symbols, the wallpaper, the color of things, how John treats her, characterization of our main lady here, why she's there, and what you end up thinking, where she actually is, what happens with her, what happens with John at the end. What does it all mean? What does it all mean? I want you to slowly read it. I want you to read it several times if you have the chance, because this is going to be part of our second essay, where you are doing an intertextual comparison between the story of an hour and the Yellow Wallpaper. These are two of my favorite short stories, mainly because they're so interesting to read, and they have these shocking, twisted ends, and they're gothic in nature. For me, that's, the Yellow Wallpaper is, for me, that's really exciting to talk about. But so I hope this helped a little bit to set it up. there's way more to say about this story. And because I already talked for so long, I didn't want to make you sit through another 30 minutes because it would take me that or more. But I want you to watch her descent into madness and really make special care to notate where things happen and how we can believe her, how we can't believe her, and what we really discover at the end of the story. So if you have questions, please feel free to email me. I'm going to put this up on my YouTube channel so it's easier to watch for you guys rather than downloading it onto your own computers or having to. So hope you're doing well. And the cold, it's going to get colder, so we're all going to be bundled up, I think, next week. Amidst all the snow that's coming, it's crazy. But I hope you're well. I miss you guys, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.